Hello, everybody. We're going to do a summary of or a review of Chapter 1 of the Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. The title of Chapter 1 is Nightmare. The chapter opens with Malcolm's mother describing how the KKK surrounded their house with rifles and shotguns while she was pregnant with Malcolm. His mother was home alone with Malcolm's three older siblings while his father was away preaching in Milwaukee. It says that the Klan wanted Malcolm's family to get out of town because his father was spreading trouble among the Negroes of Omaha with the Back to Africa teachings of Marcus Garvey. Malcolm's father, Earl Little, was a Baptist minister and a dedicated organizer of Marcus Aurelius Garvey's UNIA movement. UNIA stands for United Negro Improvement Association. Malcolm remembers his father as, quote, a big 6-foot, very black man, end quote. In regards to why his father was so passionate about Garvey's movement, he offered this quote. He says, quote, among the reasons my father decided to risk and dedicate his life to helping disseminate the philosophy among his people was that he had seen 4 of his 6 brothers die by violence, end quote. Malcolm was born on May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. He was his father's 7th child. Ella, Earl, and Mary were older siblings from a previous marriage that his father had, and they all lived in Boston. Regarding the siblings that had the same mother, his older brother Wilfred is born in Philadelphia. Hilda and Filbert were both born in Omaha. And then the family, after Malcolm is born, the family moved to Milwaukee, and his younger brother Reginald was born in Milwaukee. The book states that Malcolm's mother had a white father, and that was something that she was ashamed of. Malcolm's white grandfather is the reason for Malcolm's red hair and light skin. Malcolm's father moved the family from Milwaukee to Lansing, Michigan, in search of a place to grow their own food and build a business. Malcolm's earliest memory is when that house was burned down in 1929. He would be 4 years old at that time. The fire was started by whites that didn't want blacks to live there. Due to this harassment, the family eventually moved out to the country, outside Lansing. Here their father built a 4-room house with his own hands, and this is something that gave the entire family, a sense of pride. Sometimes Malcolm's father would beat his mother, and Malcolm believed it was because his mother had, quote, a good education, unquote. Malcolm's father subconsciously favored Malcolm because he was the lightest child. Malcolm was the only child that his father would take to the Garvey meetings. His father was the leader of these Garvey meetings. Malcolm was confused by the church. He also said that he had very little respect for most people who represented religion. The image that made Malcolm the proudest was his father's crusading and military campaigning with the words of Marcus Garvey. So they talked about Malcolm's mother being ashamed of her white father, and that also caused her to favor the darker children. Through this experience, Malcolm learned, because his mother favored the darker children, he learned that crying out in protest would accomplish things. It would get his mother's attention. Malcolm's family owned a garden and raised chickens. They were self-sufficient, and they mentioned that the family loved chicken. Malcolm started to go to school at the age of 5. While in school, he remembers that kids called him nigger so much that he thought that it was his name. He also mentioned that this was a common thing at that time. Malcolm remembers his mother and father having an argument one afternoon in 1931. They were arguing about the Black Legion, which is described as a group associated with the KKK. The argument resulted in Malcolm's father ripping the head off a rabbit and walking away. Malcolm's mother was known to have visions, and she tried to stop their father from leaving the house. The next thing Malcolm knows, he was being awakened from sleep at night to his mother screaming. The police were at the house to take his mother down to the hospital to view his father's body. His father's body was almost cut in half by a train car, and they say he lived for 2.5 hours in that condition. They said that he was, quote, a strong Georgia Negro, end quote. Malcolm was 6 at this time. Malcolm believes that his father was killed by the Black Legion. The police were trying to say that he died by accident and no one was at fault. Malcolm didn't remember the funeral, only that it was at a church, even though his father was a preacher. The service was held outside. The service was held at a mortuary. The service was attended by the Lyons family, the Gohannes family, and other black families in the town at that time. After Malcolm's father died, some of his insurance money was being withheld. The insurance company was trying to say that Malcolm's father committed suicide, and therefore they didn't have to pay the insurance. His older brother, Wilfred, understood that he would be the first to take on the responsibility to help the family. So Wilfred quit school and began working. Around this time, Malcolm begins to fight a lot with his brother and get in trouble around the town. Malcolm's mom realized that the insurance alone wouldn't support the whole family, so she gets a job when he's 6 years old. 3 years later, it says that one of the children went to visit her at work, and her employees realized that she was black, and she therefore lost her job. At this time, they start receiving welfare, and this is the beginning of their mother's mental breakdown. At this time, Malcolm didn't know that his mother was trying to preserve the family's pride, and this is 1934. He's 9 years old. They were so poor that the children would walk miles to Lansing to get cheap bread, and their mother became very good at making meals with bread. In really rough times, they would eat dandelion greens, oatmeal, or cornmeal. And the kids at school would make fun of Malcolm and his brothers and sisters, saying that they were eating grass because they had to eat dandelion greens. In late 1934, the whole family starts to break down mentally after having to go get free food that was passed out at the depot. Malcolm began to stay away from home and steal food from stores. But this began to threaten their welfare situation. The state was coming to the house, letting their mother know that if Malcolm continued to get in trouble, they would take their welfare away. Malcolm considered this time to be the downfall of the family. He talks about growing up around white kids at that time. They were tipping over outhouses, and he talks about a story of trading nickels. He says that if someone's gambling and they're always winning, they're not gambling, they're cheating. Some Seventh-day Adventists moved in nearby and began to visit their mom. Malcolm's mom liked the Mosaic dietary laws. The state was always in the house trying to separate the family. The state considered his mom crazy because she wouldn't accept free food even though she was poor. But there's a story in the book about a neighbor or someone trying to give them some free food. It was free pig, but they didn't eat pig, so they did not. They turned it down, but that was seen as something crazy if you were poor and you couldn't support your family. His mother ends up meeting a guy after their father, but the guy leaves after 2 years. He says this is when his mother begins to talk to herself. Malcolm and the other children watched their mother mentally deteriorate. He says, quote, "As my mother talked to herself more and more, she gradually became less responsive to us. We children watched our anchor giving way," end quote. Malcolm would eventually be sent to live with the Gohannes family. Malcolm's mother eventually suffers a complete breakdown, and she's sent to the state mental hospital at Kalamazoo. The hospital was over 2 miles away, and it took an hour and a half by bus to reach the hospital. There was a judge in Lansing that had control over all the children. They were now court wards, which Malcolm considered, quote, legal modern slavery, end quote. Malcolm's mother ends up staying at the hospital for 26 years. He says, quote, nothing that I can imagine could have moved me as deeply as seeing her pitiful state, end quote. Malcolm last visited his mother in the hospital in 1952. He would be 27 years old at that time. His mom didn't recognize him. He says, quote, I can't describe how I felt. The woman who brought me into this world and nursed me and advised me and chastised me and loved me didn't know me, end quote. Malcolm's mother left the hospital in 1963 to live with his older brother and their family, his older brother Filbert. Malcolm felt that the state destroyed his family and helped shape his future political opinions. He says, quote, hence I have no mercy or compassion in me for a society that will crush people and they will penalize them for not being able to stand under the weight, end quote. Malcolm rarely talks about his mother. In 1937, the family was separated. Hilda and Wilfred were able to stay in the house that their father built, and the family remained in touch throughout their separation. And that's the end of chapter 1. Share this video if you like what you heard. Let me know if you disagree with anything. And visit MalcolmXFoundation.org if you'd like to make a donation to Malcolm X or his family. And with that, I'll see y'all in chapter 2. Thank you.